would be loosened. The policy of Buzz was fixed. It was first come, first served to all the world. The terms in this present crisis would be 50% of the purchase price to be placed in escrow at the First National Bank of Newcastle, Connecticut, before the order was accepted. The ballots to be placed in escrow a week before the completion of the order, to be paid against bills of lading when shipment was made. Munitions makers had grown suddenly exacting, it appeared. Robbie had in confidentiality ever ran that he had cabled his firm recommending an immediate increase of 50% in its entire schedule of prices, this to meet inevitable rises in the cost of materials and labor. The visitors would depart. And while the next lot cooled their heels in the lobby, the salesman would take off the heavy alligator skin belt which he always wore, slip a cash, and draw out several long strips of parchment with fine writing on them. He would sit at his portable typewriter, the newest contraption created by Yankee ingenuity, and would study the parchment strips and proceed to type out a cablegram in code. This secret code had been one of the thrills of Lanny's life for several years. It was changed every time Robbie made a trip, and there were only 2 copies of it in existence. The other was in the possession of Robbie's father. The one other person who knew about it was the confidential clerk who devised it, and who did the coding for the president of the company. The belt in which Robbie kept his own copy was never off his person except when he was in the bathtub or in swimming. Usually he swam from a boat, and before he sank down among the fishes he would make sure there were no agents of foreign governments nearby. Robbie had taught quite a lot about ciphers and codes. Any cipher could be broken by an expert. But the code was safer, because it gave purely arbitrary meanings to words. The smartest expert could hardly find out that Gamemen meant Turkey, or that Ipergrif meant the Premier of Romania. Robbie would use the cable company's codebook for the ordinary phrases of his message, had promised immediate delivery, or advise acceptance, and so on. But crucial words, such as names of countries, of individuals who was dealing with the goods they were ordering, were in the private code. These precautions had been adopted after a deal had been lost because Haroff had a man in the office of bug gun makers and was getting copies of Robbie's messages. Seeing how overwhelmed his father was, Lenny asked if he could help. And the father said, "'Tis too bad you don't know how to type. You find the letters on the keyboard," replied the boy, "and you don't hit them so fast yourself. You'll find it's pretty poor fun. If I'm really helping you, I'll think it's the best fun there is." So Robbie wrote his cablegram in English, and showed the boy how to look up phrases from the regular codebook, and underline those words which would be in his own list. While Robbie interviewed a friend of Captain Rogestu, who just arrived from Romania, Lenny worked patiently by the uncontact method, producing a long string of 10-letter words, California indicated hilarious smoking necessance, and so on. Lenny's grandfather, who had tried hard not to let him be born, and who so far had refused to recognize the failure of that effort, began from this payslip for the service that the government of Holland was anxious over the possibility of invasion, and would pay 30% premium for delivery of 20,000 carbines during the month of August. By the time Robbie's interview was concluded, the message was ready, and he went over it and found only 2 or 3 errors, and said it was a great help. Which of course made the boy as proud as punch. Robbie burned the original message, and let the ashes drop into the toilet bowl. Then Lenny asked, "Will you ever add anything out of code?" "Sometimes," replied the father. "Hi. Us say, and he coded this." Robbie chuckled, but he said, "8 till he sells the guns and gets the money." I mean, the cablegram dispatched, the pair went for a stroll, to get some fresh air into their lungs before lunch. "The other delegations could wait," said Robbie. No sense in killing
Dr. Word
was loaded up with orders. In the past couple of weeks they had accumulated a backlog for 6 months.
The
For years
evil
Robbie had
fist
been urging the family to
crunch.
expand the plant. Robbie's eldest brother,
It's
Walker,
nefarious
who was in charge of
plan.
production, had opposed it, but finally their father had adopted Lenny's program. Now he wouldn't have to worry anymore. Has he worrying about? Asked Lenny, and Robbie answered, "Anchors. Once you let Wall Street get its claws into you, you cease to be a family institution." It was Friday, the last day of July. Newsboys were shouting loud here again. Germany had declared martial law.
Man,
She
my
was going to
internet's
war
going
with
in and
somebody,
out.
it could only be with Princess Ally.
Stanton.
People appeared to have lost interest in the ordinary tasks. They stopped on street corners, or in front of bistros, kiosks,
The thing
tobacco
is,
shops, to talk about the
I'm
movement of
recording this at the same
People
time,
spoke
so
in
I'm going to
Europe,
move this
Romania,
up to my
They scared,
YouTube
said
channel, the
Had those
full
human beings together.
4-hour
There came the sound
stream
of drums. A regiment marched
when
toward
this
the
is
east,
over,
of
because
course.
I've got a
The
recording
soldiers
of
sweated
it.
under a load of equipment. Rifle, bayonet, knapsack,
I don't know
a
what's
big
going on
blanket,
with the
a
internet.
canteen,
I think
even a little spade.
we had some
Their blue coats were long and heavy,
thunderstorms.
Their red trousers big and baggy. The crowds came running, but they didn't cheer. Neither the soldiers
Who
nor
we
the
got
people
in
looked happy. "S-Rest mobilizing?" asked Lenny, and his father replied,
Mr.
"Groups would be
Emotional
moving toward
Young
the frontier in
Sacred
any
Cow.
case."
Nice knowing
They returned to the Krillin, and while they were at lunch a cablegram was
Smurf
brought to
account.
Robbie.
Wait a minute, are you
Robbie
in with
Castle,
us?
He said. It was in code, of course, and Lenny exclaimed eagerly, "H, let me try it." The father said, "K." When they went upstairs, Robbie took off the magic belt, and Lenny shut himself in his bedroom with cablegram and codebook, leaving the father free for more interviews.
Oh, they all coming
The
over here. I don't know
cablegram
if I
conveyed the
want to go
information that
over here.
Turkey
If
was
they're all
24 hours
crowded.
overdue upon the first payment for ground-type
I want to get over
guns
here.
were. Might it not be wise to cancel the deal and dispose of the guns to the British Army?
There.
Robbie was to
That's
advise
what I like.
immediately with increased price he thought the British would pay. It sounded so important that Lenny took the decoded message to his father, and Robbie cut short his interview and got busy on the telephone to locate a member of the British military mission then holding consultations with the French Ministry of War. Lenny went down to put into code the words, "buys cancellation Turkey and making inquiries Britain." A man like Robbie Budd would normally have a secretary with him. But Robbie was active, and had always preferred to handle his own affairs and write his own letters to his father. Now he was caught in a sudden hurricane, and less willing than ever to trust anybody. So there was a chance for a 14-year-old boy to step into a secretary's job for which he was not without some preparation. Robbie checked the message and found it all right. He put on his magic belt and went down to take a taxi for an appointment with a British officer. Lenny filed the cablegram and then went to the street and
My
bought the
internet
news
was
from the
going out.
street. When he came back, he found there was a letter for his mother in the familiar handwriting of Marcel's days and postmarked on Las Pins. It was an unusually thick letter, and Lenny didn't have to guess.
I got it. When I get off
Marcel
today, I'm
would be
gonna
forward.
call
He
my
took it up to his
provider.
mother's suite.
Because I think, you know, my modem, it's like my, usually I'm on hardwire on. Today I'm on wireless. Because only one of the hardwire, the 4 hardwire ports from the router or whatever it is, is working. And I put my wife on that because she got to have her phone.
But he feared that wouldn't be polite. He merely asked, "Is he in trouble? Really?" He was uncertain about everything, she answered, and then started to read on the letter, which was in French, and began to read. Before she got very far, her voice broke, and she handed him the sheets, saying, "Who have to know about it?" Lenny read, "I've been hoping every day to hear from you and to see you, but now I fear it will be too late. It looks as if there will be mobilization.
That's
and I
that
cannot
Norwegian
come to terms
guy.
because it would look like running away. I cannot be sure,
Who's
but I
this?
expect my class will be called among the first.
Mr. Emotional, man, thank you.
I will write you.
Mr. Emotional, I
I
love
don't know
you.
where I shall be, but you can write me in care of my regiment. Keep reminding myself that you are an
Teamwork. That's what we
American,
need in
and I
this
cannot be sure
world.
how you will feel about
Or
what is
Solid
happening.
Snake.
But you know that
Solid
I have a
Snake.
passion
Oh no!
and have no doubt
Somebody's
that
got a
this life
dang
must be conflict.
mortar on my
It is
behind.
cruel that our happiness has to be
Man.
broken, and that millions of other women will
Child,
be
that
stricken with
girl.
grief. It is perhaps a minor
You have
tragedy that men of
ruined
town
my
have to be
whole-
dragged from their task of making beauty, and instead must destroy
Let's
it
jump in
upon
the
the
middle of things and see what
But it is our
happens.
fate, and if the summons comes, I shall not permit
I'm
myself to
coming,
be
man.
reconfided by you. In this, I hope for your
I
help.
ain't playing with y'all.
The sad idea has been haunting my mind.
You just go ahead and kill me. See if I care. I don't.
It may be that my wish to
I'm
go
just
with
gonna
your son.
reincarnation on
I
your
have thought
behind.
about it day and
That's what
night,
I'm
and
gonna
what
do.
it is my duty to say to you. I have written half a dozen letters and torn them up. I have pleaded with you for the right of our love. And then I have decided that I was being selfish, thinking about my own welfare while making myself believe I was thinking about yours. I have written a letter of renunciation
Oh,
in the name
man,
of truth,
brother.
unselfish love.
Can
and then
y'all
decided
just-
that I would seem cold,
oh.
when in reality I was so trembling with grief and longing that my hand could hardly control the pen. If I could have one
Now,
hour's
how
talk
did
with
you scamper?
I could
How
make
come
it all
you
clear.
can scamper like
I
that in
expected
my
it is my right,
fence?
and you gave me to
That's
think that I was
weird.
to have it.
It slowed
But
it
you
down
have postponed
a
the
little
call, and
bit.
I felt that you must have known about this crisis and the prospect of my being called to the defense of my country.
It's
This is
Curious
not simply
George. I ain't
but
seen you in
merely
here,
to
man.
explain my
What's
situation.
Curious George? What you
And what you are about to read,
doing?
I beg you to
I
remember
love me
our
some
ecstasy.
Curious George.
Remember our tears that mingle, and all the faults of our hearts. Everything that I have ever been to you, I am today, and will be forever,
Lord.
if fate spares me. I love you. My being trembles when I think of you. My courage dissolves. I curse war, mankind, fate, and God himself. That gives us such bliss and then tears it away. I feel all that.
I'm
and I know
I'm
that.
leaving team.
But
Look,
also I am a citizen of France, with a duty there is no escaping. Also I am a rational man, knowing what the world is, and what can happen to a woman in it. I say, and have you to offer to this woman, or to any woman born to the pleasant things of life? Here are times when I feel that I know about the value of my own work. I say, 'tis good, and someday the world will know that it is good. But then I remember how Van Gogh succeeded in selling only one painting in his lifetime, and that to his brother. So I asked myself, have I anything more than he had? I tell myself there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of painters, each as sure of his own merits as I am of mine. And very few of them can be right. Who can say there is any sure
I'm gonna
guarantee
wait
that
for my
genuine
new
merit will be
friend.
recognized in the world? Why may it not be suffocated by indifference, just as life may be annihilated in the blast of war? Tell myself that if you go to America, you will almost certainly marry there, and I shall never see you again. Grief overwhelms me. But then reason speaks, reminding me that my life may be snuffed out in a few days or worse, that I may be mutilated, and made into something you had better not see or know about. I say, if she takes her dear son to America, that will be the happiest path for her and for him. Her wise American friends must be telling her that. What right have I to add to the ache of her heart? T may be, CH read, that all this is fantasy. If so, call it a lover's nightmare, and laugh at it. But it is better to write something foolish than not to let you know my heart. If I am called, what I write thereafter will be under the eyes of an army censor. I beg you to learn not to worry about me, it is the destiny of the men of our time. France must be saved from the insolence of an autocrat, and whatever comes to each individual is just to endure. My love, my blessings go with you, and my prayers for your happiness. Tears had come into Lanny's eyes as he read, and were trickling down his cheeks. When he was through he, too, sat staring before him, not seeing anything, not knowing anything to say. He didn't think that Marcel believed in prayers, or in blessings. Was it just a manner of speaking, or was it a cry run from him when his own forces were not enough to meet his need? Maybe he would be glad to go to war, and to get killed, as a way of escape from his grief. T's her own affair, Robbie had said to his son. T's a mistake to urge people to any course, because then they hold you responsible for the consequences. Let her make her own decision. So the boy didn't say a word, just let the tears trickle. H, Lenny, what shall I do? Whispered Beauty, at last. When he didn't answer, she began to sob. T's monstrous that a man like Marcel should be dragged away to war. He doesn't have to be dragged, said the boy. Won't you see that he would go anyway? We can't help that part of it. Most of the women of France will have that to endure. Robbie had said this, and the boy knew it was right. But Beauty was a different kind of woman, belonging to the class which wasn't supposed to suffer. So far she had refused to do so. That was why it seemed such a perfect solution of the problem to flee to America, in the care of a
50
capable man who had no
Arachnos
part in the Arabs'
battles
hates and slaughters.
won.
That was undoubtedly the sensible way as Robbie
That's a
emulated all her
trip,
friends
because I
kept assuring
always
her.
spawn
How
Arachnos
provoking and
last,
unreasonable that a woman who had given
unless
her
I
heart to death and without finding it all
accidentally
bleeding
get
in summer.
spawned into a death match
Ellie,
with
what shall I do?
Arachnos.
She repeated.
That's a
Ollie
random
doesn't want me to
choice.
say any more about it, the boy
Wow,
answered.
50.
You know what I think.
I did
Harry is
that.
coming to take me to dinner, persisted the mother. Am I to say to him? The boy remembered what his father had told him during the affair Zagrov. Ellen with facts, Beauty. VI.
30 gold
Lenny
medals
returned
for
to his other
Germans.
job.
Wow.
Robbie wrote out a long message to his father, advising him that Turkish officials were deeply involved in intrigues with Germany and the outcome might be a blockade of all Turkish ports. The British military mission advised that Britain would certainly want all the ground-type air-cooled machine guns it could get. Robbie advised against charging a higher price, except as part of a general boost in the price schedule. He recommended this latter more urgently than ever. Future quotations should be subject to increase depending upon raw material prices certain to jump enormously. A long message which would take a good part of the afternoon. Robbie hated to put it off on the youngster, but Lanny said he had never done
Man, I'm
anything he
sorry.
enjoyed more.
I'm sorry, bro.
He would stick right there and
I'm
make
gonna
himself an
send
expert, and
you.
when Robbie was willing to send a message without checking it,
What
he
I'm
would be
about
as
to
proud as if he
do
got the tiny red ribbon of the Legion of
is,
Honor. So they went to work. Lanny at his table, and the
I'm in
father
my
talked to his
daughter's
exhausted military men. This went on until after
my
7 o'clock,
daughter's
when Robbie said,
Macarena
"Hey,
account,
no
so
matter what
I'm
happens,
gonna.
you're up.
I ran
Let's
out
go
of my
to a place
combat
where real
point
Persians eat,"
limit,
he suggested.
so I'm getting ready
Oh,
to
I know, we'll
put
be there.
my
They got
ID
into a
code
taxi,
for the
and he
other
gave an address
account
on the
up,
Google Mark
and I hope you will
He was
add
to
me
meet the
there,
journalist.
and we
A
can
man
have
who
some
has
more
worked wild
fun.
connections, and often
Let's
brings me
see.
tips. I gave him a couple of $100 franc notes. It's the custom of the country. It was a place
Escape.
Lanny had never heard of before. There were many tables on the sidewalk, but Robbie passed these by and strolled inside. He looked about, and went toward a table where sat a little man with heavy dark mustache and beard, pince-nez on a black silk coat, and a black tie. The man jumped up when he saw him. M. Boot. He exclaimed, trying to say it American fashion, but not succeeding. Bonjour, and Pastier, replied Robbie, and introduced Lanny, on SECR tenor. The man looked puzzled. For not many businessmen have secretaries 14 years old. Robbie laughed, and added, Simone Phils. Boater Phils. Exclaimed the Frenchman, exuberantly, and shook hands with the lad. Le Crown Prince, hein? Lesbia, replied Robbie. His French was no better than M. Pastier's American. The other invited them to sit down. They ordered, and Robbie included a large bottle of wine, knowing that his acquaintance would assist them. The Frenchman was a voluble talker, and impressed Lanny greatly. The boy was too young to realize that persons in this profession sometimes pretend to know more than they can know.
I gotta go
To
get this
listen to him,
guy.
you would have thought he was the
I'm getting ready
intimate
to
friend
get
of all
your
the
number.
prominent members of the cabinet, and had talked with several of them that afternoon. He reported that Germany had been making desperate efforts to detach France from her Russian engagements. The German ambassador pleaded with friends of mine at the Quai d'Orsay. Here is and should be no need for two highly civilized nations to engage in strife. Russia is a barbarous state, a tattered empire, essentially Asiatic. So they argue. They would prefer to devour us at a second meal, added the Frenchman, his black eyes shining. A tournament, said Robbie. We have an alliance. The word of France has been given. Imagine, if you can, the insolence of these Teutones to demand of us the fortresses of Toul and Verdun, as guarantees of our abandonment of the Russian alliance. Is it probable that we built them for that? As probable, assented the American. Can the French people hear that, they will rise as one man. Exclaimed the journalist, and illustrated with a vigorous rising of both arms. And will your workers do, your socialists? Asked Robbie. It was a question which troubled everybody. The other said, Ook, and indicated with his eyes. We're there at that table by the window. The question is being settled tonight. The Americans saw 8 or 10 men sitting at dinner, talking among themselves. They might have been journalists like M. Pastier, or perhaps doctors or lawyers. At the head of the table was a large stoutish man with a heavy gray beard, a broad face, and grand fatherly appearance. R.S., whispered the Frenchman. Lanny had heard the name. He knew it was one of the socialist leaders, and that he made eloquent speeches in the Chamber of Deputies. What Lanny saw was a heavy-set old gentleman with baggy clothes, talking excitedly, with many gestures. They are socialist editors and deputies, explained M. Pastier. They have just returned from the conference at Brussels. The three watched for a while, and others in the restaurant did the same. The socialists were men of the people, deciding the affairs of the people, and there was no need for them to hide themselves. Lanny decided that their leader must be a kind old gentleman, but he looked exhausted and harassed. "'Tis a grave problem for them," explained the journalist. "For they are internationalists, and against war. But Joras spoke plainly to the Germans in Brussels. If they obey their Kaiser and march, there will be nothing for the French workers to do but defend their patrie. Have you seen Humanit this morning?" "Don't patronize it," said Robbie. R.S. speaks of an irremediable need to save his family and his country even through armed nationalism. Too bad he didn't discover that before he began advocating the general strike in case of war. R.S. is an honest man. I say it, even though I have opposed him. I have known him for many years. Would you be interested to meet him?" "Oh, thanks," said Robbie, coldly.
I'm about to
He's a
start
bit out of my
removing.
line.
The thing about it
He
is
linked the
I
conversation
don't
to the
know
chances of British
why
intervention in the expected war. He
all
had his
these
reasons
people
for
that I
wanting to
only
know
saw
about that.
one time
It would be worth many 100 franc notes to bug gun makers.
add me.
After dinner, father and son strolled along the boulevards and looked at the
And I have
crowds.
very few people
When
that
they
I
got to the
see a
club,
lot.
there was another cablegram. Lenny began insisting that he wasn't at all tired. Surely he could work till bedtime, and so on when the telephone rang, and Robbie answered. Huh? He cried, and then, adieu. And, what that mean? He listened for a while, then hung up the receiver and said, RS has been shot. It was the boy's turn to exclaim and question. Where we left him, said the father. Hello on the street pushed the window curtains aside and put a couple of bullets into the back of his head. He's dead? Pastia reports. Home did it.
See, I don't know any of these people.
Home patriot, they suppose. Somebody who thought he was going to oppose the war. That will happen now? Robbie shrugged his shoulders, almost as if he had been a Frenchman. He's just one life. If war starts, there'll be a million others. C'est la guerre, as the French say. Pastia says that Germany's expected to declare war on Russia tomorrow. And if so, France is in. VII. It was hard upon a young fellow who had just assumed an important and responsible position to have to be distracted by the sex problem. Lenny learned how it interferes with business, and all the other serious things of life. He set a plague upon it for the first time in his life, but not for the last. Here he was, the next morning, comfortably fixed by the window in his bedroom, with the code material and a long message from Connecticut, madly delayed by congestion of the cables. But instead of looking up the word articles, he was sitting lost in thought, and presently interrupting his father's reading of the mail. Abby, don't you think one of us ought to say duty for a few minutes? Anything special? Asked the other, absent-mindedly. Harry told her last night that she'd have to make up her mind, or he's going back to the States without her. She says it's an ultimatum. Al, there's a lot of ultimatums being served right now. One more hardly counts. Old joke, Robbie. She's terribly upset. How's she doing? Us sitting staring in front of her. Has she got a looking glass? Lenny saw that his father was determined to keep out of it. So he looked up the word articles. But before he started on the word lightning, he interrupted again. Abby, does it often happen that a woman thinks she is in love with two men and can't decide which? Yes, said the father. T happens to both men and women. He put down the letter he was reading and added, T happened to me, when I had to decide whether I was going to get married or not. It was the first time Robbie had ever spoken of that event to his son, and the boy waited to see if he'd say more. Had to make up my mind, and I did. And now Beauty has to do it. It won't hurt her to sit staring in front of her. She's owed it to herself for a long while to do some serious thinking. So Lanny looked up lightning, and 3 or 4 words more. But he couldn't help trying once again. Abby, you don't want me to give Beauty advice. But I've already given her some, and I know it's counting with her.
Man, I'm glad he's
You don't think it was good advice?
And Eva
she wasn't what I'd give her.
Glad.
But it may be right for her. She's a sentimental person, and it seems she's very much in love with that painter fellow. Really she is, Robbie. I watch them all the time on the yacht. Anybody could see it. He's a lot younger than she is. And that's going to make a tragedy someday. You mean, Marcel will stop loving her? Not entirely, perhaps. He'll be torn in half, just the way she is now. You mean he'll get interested in some younger woman? Mean he'll have to be a saint if he doesn't. And I haven't met any saints among French painters. You ought to know Marcel better, Robbie. He is one of the very best men I ever have met. I'm taking your word for him. But there's a lot you still must learn, son. Beauty would be Gortha is, by the standards of everyone she knows or wants to know. And that's awful hard on the affections. It gets worse and worse as you get older, too. You think it's right for people to marry for money, then? Think there's an awful lot of bunk talk on the subject. People fool themselves, and try to fool other people. I watched marriages, scores of them, and I know that money was the important element in most. It was dressed up in fine words.
I do remember some battles with this.
It was called amulet, an Oshile position, an ultra, and refinement. But are those things real? Sure they are. Each is like a fine house. It's built on a foundation, and the foundation is money. If you build a house without any foundation, it doesn't last long. See, said the boy. It impressed him greatly, like everything his father said. Don't let anybody fool you about money, son. The people who talk that nonsense don't believe it themselves. They tell you that money won't buy this, that, and the other thing. I tell you that money will buy an awful lot, especially if you're a good shopper. You get my point? Sure, Robbie. Emma Huckleberry. Money bought her a yacht, and the yacht got her a lot of friends. Now she's lost her yacht, and she and her captain will have to live on £2,000 a year. And how many of her old friends will come to see her? She'll be embarrassed if they do, because she can keep up with them. She'll find that she's forced to get some cheaper friends. No, Robbie, there are people like that. But others are interested in art, and music, and books, and so on. That's quite true. And I'm glad to see that you prefer such friends. But when those friends grow old, and their blood flows slower, they'll want a warm fire, and money will buy the fire. Money won't buy them appreciation of books, but it will buy them books, and what's the use of appreciation if you haven't anything to use it on? No, son, the only way to be happy without money is to go and live in a tub, like Dio James, or be a Hindu with a rag around your loins and a bowl to beg for rice. Even then you can't live unless other people have cared enough for money to grow rice, and to market and transport it. And you don't think there's anything we can do for beauty? And I think, son, is that one or the other of us has got to work at that code. Because this is a time of crisis, and a whole lot of women have worse troubles than trying to make up their minds which man they want. VII. That was the 1st of August. And early in the day came the news that Germany had declared war on Russia. Soon afterward it was reported that both Germany and France had ordered general mobilization. The temperature of Paris changed in an hour. Previously everything had been hushed. People anxious, frightened, horrified. But now the die was cast. It was war. That hateful Kaiser with his waxed mustaches, those military men who surrounded him, strutting and blustering, he had thrown Europe into the furnace. At least, that was the way the Paris crowd saw it. And business came to an end for the day. Everybody rushed into the streets. Bugles sounding everywhere, drums rolling, crowds marching and cheering. They were singing the Marseillaise on every street corner. And Albrock, Shanbati and Darrow, which Americans sing, or He's a Jolly Good Fellow, also the Armagnac, which Americans do not know, all the old revolutionary songs of France, now become patriotic and respectable. Lenny finished his secretarial labors and went out to see the sights, the most stirring any boy could have imagined. Keep mobilization orders posted on kiosks and walls. Young men assembling and marching to the trains. Women and girls running beside them, singing, weeping hysterically, or laughing, borne up by the excitement of the throngs. People throwing flowers at them, putting roses in the soldiers' red caps, in the hair of the girls. And the regiments marching to the railroad stations, or being loaded into trucks. It wouldn't be long before you could no longer find a taxi cab or even a horse in Paris.
Thank you.
And then back to the Hotel Krillin. The Champs-Élysées S, that wide avenue, and the great open spaces, the Place de la Concorde, the Place du Carrousel, now like military encampments. Regiments marching, horses galloping, artillery rumbling, people singing, shouting, a Guerre. La Guerre. Inside the hotel, another kind of tumult, for it appeared that there were thousands of Americans
Orlando
in Paris, and they
sucks.
all wanted to
Psycho
get
for
out
you,
quickly.
Twisted Sister, Bowser Jar, and Cash Out.
They
I know
wanted
all
food and
these
shelter,
guys, my
railroad
buddies.
tickets, steamer accommodations, everything all at once. They had been
And
reading about
Juicy
a new
Fruit
kind of
on my
warfare,
team, and
had
Granny
visions of
sent me.
squadrons of German
Hey
airplanes dropping
Granny,
bombs upon
hey
Paris that
Granny,
afternoon.
how you doing?
It
Hey
seemed that every
Granny.
person who had ever met Robbie Bud was now asking him for advice, for the loan of money, for his influence in getting something
Love
from the
you,
embassy,
Granny.
from the consulate, from
You got
railroad
so
and
many
steamship and travel
coins.
bureaus.
I hope you do better this
When they
battle.
could get hold of Robbie,
You're on
they
my
would go to
team.
his former wife, who had always been able to get anything from him. Beauty, who wanted to sit and stare in front of her and think, who wanted to eat without anybody seeing her ruined complexion, had to put on food bags.
Oh, I'm about to die like as soon as I step in here. What does this guy got? How did he do that to me? So dang quick.
And tell them that Robbie said that there wasn't
Took
any
a
immediate
shield
danger,
out?
that the embassy would have
Oh,
been signed
Lord.
as soon as they had time to hear from Washington. That Robbie
Psycho
himself
for
couldn't
you,
possibly
you know, he coming my way. He
was
don't look
besieged by military
happy.
men trying to buy things which he didn't have and couldn't make 4 months yet. They even fell upon Robbie's newly appointed secretary to ask what he knew and what he thought.
Man, I'm coming for you, Psycho for you. And I'm coming with
He was
my
like going to
weakest
war
mate.
himself. He would run to his father with something he thought especially
Serious.
urgent, and there would be that solid rock of a man,
Where
hearty,
is he?
serene, smiling.
Oh,
He'd say,
Here he is.
remember,
Oh, it's
some of these
Balthazar.
impossibles in this old Europe, and this real
man, I'm Jewish. You're not supposed to
He'd say,
have that name.
remember, some of these are real friends.
Balthazar.
And some are splinters who
We
are
don't like
the
that.
money they're trying to borrow.
I don't
He'd
care.
say
You
when
go
he
ahead
sat
and
in
kill
the
me.
window,
You just go
watching the
ahead.
troops
You
march
just
by
go
and the
ahead and
flags
kill me.
flying,
Go
listening
on
to the
ahead.
drums beating and
Go
the crowd
on,
shouting.
go on with you.
He'd see the full amount of
Go on and
his
kill
cheeks
me.
and the
Go
light
on.
shining in his
Go on
eyes,
and kill me.
and he'd say,
Kill me.
remember,
Kill me. Kill me.
kiddo,
Come on.
this isn't your
Come on.
war.
Don't
Don't
hesitate.
make any mistake and take it into your heart. You're an American. IX.
I need to get that
was the
Psycho
line the
for
father
you.
was going to take. Budge didn't
There he
engage
is
in any
over
wars.
there.
Budge made munitions and played no favorites.
Well, I got
The
27
father found time
Orlando
to
sucks.
fix
Oh,
confusions, to hammer that fact
did
into
you
the
mind?
I'll have to go back to Newcastle to try to straighten out my father and brothers. And I don't
Oh,
want my son
Lord.
to step into anybody's bear
Here it
trap.
comes.
Remember, there never was a war in which the right was all on one side. And remember that in every war both sides lie like hell. That's half the battle, keeping up the spirits of your own crowd and getting allies to help you. Truth is whatever you can get believe. Remember it every time you pick up a newspaper. The father went on to prove his
Oh,
case.
you're not supposed to be taking
He
my
told how
control
Bismarck had
point.
forged a telegram in order to get the
Stop.
Franco-Prussian War started when he was ready for it. He told about the intrigues of the Tsar's government.
Somebody get
that was
this guy.
discussed in corrupting Europe.
Get him.
He explained how the great financial interests, the steel cartels, the oil and electrical trusts, and the banks which financed them
Thank you.
controlled both France and Germany. They owned properties in both countries and would see that those properties were protected. They would make billions of profits and buy
All
new
right,
properties
Oprah,
and be
song.
more than ever masters. However, the
I
war
love
ended.
you.
And
Do
he
not
got
get
right.
killed. Back
Continue to
up.
follow. That's their business. Only remember
Oh.
it isn't yours.
Don't
Remember
go
that
over
on their
there.
properties are all the big
You
newspapers.
don't.
Find out who owns
I
the
told
money
you
man.
not to go over there.
Robbie took up several that were lying on the table.
Oh, Lord.
This did wonders, he said. He counted desk forged steel trust that runs French politics. This one Schneider Croson. And here's your old friend Zaroff.
Somebody. Oh, and
The
there are
father
two
opened
of
the
them
paper
up in
and
here.
asked, did you get
Man,
this little
y'all
story?
bullying
It was an
is
account of a state
what you
ceremony
is.
which had taken place on the
Bullying
previous day.
is.
Zaroff had been promoted
Oh.
as commander of the Legion of Honor. A strange bit of irony.
Ganging up. You want to gang up on me.
Don't give any grief for socialist tub thumpers, said
I'll
Robbie.
sue.
But he was perhaps honest, as you heard Pastier say. They shoot you, and they give one of their highest honors to an old Levantine trader who would sell the whole country tomorrow
Think
for
I'm
100 million
playing?
francs. I
I'm
think
not
all the Americans
playing.
compare and sympathize with France, because they believe that France had
Let's
won
go get
peace,
this other
and
one.
because it was a republic. But Robbie wouldn't leave it at that.
Cash
What
out.
counted nowadays was
Cash
business,
out.
and the oil,
Cash
steel,
out.
ammunitions manufactured
Cash
that
out.
all the others
Thank
wanted.
you.
As if peace when you lend billions of francs to Russia, and force them to spend the money for arms to fight Germany? Suppose you're right, the boy had to admit. Put yourself in the place of the German people, play our friend Kurt, and his family, and millions like them. They looked at their eastern border. Dark cloud
Oh,
of
you
piracy,
are
the
annoyance.
Percy the Dark called it. Lenny remembered
Twister
sadly.
sister.
Russian diplomacy
don't
has
kill
one
my
purpose:
bro.
get Constantinople, and that means to keep Germany from getting it.
Oh, Lord.
Russia is called the
Here it come
steamroller,
again.
and it's built to roll westward. The French paid for it and taught the Russians how to run it. Of course, the Germans will fight like hell to stop it. How do you think
Oh.
Purely as a sporting proposition.
I should not be laughing because he's about to kill me.
The French
And
are
I'm in
setting
the
out for Berlin,
I'm in
and
the
the Germans
funnel.
for
Come on,
Paris.
help me, guys.
They'll meet.
Oh, here it
Two
comes,
sides-
please save me.
one side's
Oh,
the other.
save me, help, please don't kill me.
Only thing you can be sure
Please
of
don't
is
kill me. I don't want to die.
3 or 4 months.
It's Twister
Both sides
Sister.
would go bankrupt if it lasted longer.
Come on.
And you are willing to do.
Oh,
Make a
no,
fight
I
money,
unloaded my hold on.
The
Oh,
men
shit.
who made the decision are running around like a lot of ants when you turn over a stone.
At
If England
him.
had said she'd defend France, there wouldn't have been any war. But that's the trouble with countries that have
I
problems.
suppose you
They can
know.
make up their minds to anything not
This
until it's
means
too late.
war.
X. Harry Murchison had put down his money and engaged a stateroom or 2 on a steamer sailing the next day. Also a berth for landing in another stateroom. He had done this before the rush began, and now it was a part
Twister
of his
Sister,
game.
I love
He
you.
and Beauty would be married that night.
Man, you my sweet
Or they would be
honey,
married by the captain of the
darling.
steamer.
And I want to
Harry
help
came
you
2 or 3 times during
untwist
the
and
day to
untie
plead his
your
cause and argue
knots.
against the folly of hesitation. He would lock the door so that nobody could interrupt him, and he wouldn't let her answer the telephone.
I'm Jewish, so I don't
He
like
was a
this,
young man who had used
this
to having his own way
Babylonian
most of his life.
I don't like
He
it.
hadn't much consideration for Beauty's feelings.
Kept
He
me in
said that she was
slavery.
somewhat disturbed
That's what
right
you
now,
did.
and didn't really know her own mind. Once the die was cast, the marriage words spoken, she sat down and be glad somebody had acted for her. It was the technique known in America as high-pressure salesmanship. Beauty would beg for time, but Harry would insist, "We got to sail on that steamer. There's going to be an awful lot of plate glass smashed in the next few months, and I've got to be in Pittsburgh to see about replacing it. Won't leave me, Harry," the tormented woman pleaded. "Surely you can put it off 1 more week. If you don't go now, you mayn't be able to go until the war's over. Call up the steamship company and see what they tell you. Everything is booked for months ahead, and there's talk of our government having to send steamers to get Americans out of Europe." Robbie decided suddenly that he had better go too. Cablegrams were being delayed and censorship might stop them entirely. He told Harry that if Beauty rejected the chance, he'd take her half of the stateroom. Don't let her know it. He hastened to add, "If she goes, I'll manage to get on board somehow." Robbie was a friend of all the steamship people, and knew discreet ways to arrange matters. "He can put a cot in the captain's cabin," he remarked, smiling. It was a trying position for him, not knowing whether his future was to be on the French Riviera or in the smoky valley of steel and coal 3,000 miles to the west. He made no complaint for himself, but he did think that the cards were being stacked against Marcel. It was an elementary principle of justice that both sides should be represented in any court. Lenny had a strong impulse to represent the painter, but Robbie had asked him to keep his hands off, and Robbie's wish was a command. In between codings and decodings, Lenny would go to see his mother, and tell her that he loved her. That was about all he could say. Toward evening he found Mrs. Emily with her. And these 2 fashionable ladies had tears running down their cheeks. It wasn't because of Beauty's problems, nor was it the million French women left at home to face the thought of bereavement. It was a terrible story which Mrs. Emily had brought. While troops were marching and crowds shouting and singing in all the streets, fate had chosen to strike another blow at Isadora Duncan. She had lain in agony for many hours, trying to bear her baby. And at last when it was placed in her arms, she had felt it suddenly beginning to turn cold. She screamed, and the attendants came running
A
and tried to
bone
save